Hello and welcome to the Amplitude e-commerce webcast, where we talk about all things that make e-commerce better, more profitable, and more safe. And today I'm excited to have with me here my friend and partner, Jeff Ferguson. It's no relation, but Jeff heads our paid media teams here, covering pay-per-click and SEM, paid social, SEO, and so much more here in Los Angeles, California. And Jeff is also a teacher and speaker about these topics, and just great to have you on here today. Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me on.
You bet. You bet. It's an honor, sir, to have you here. So you've written this article, and it's called The COVID-19 Shuffle, How Businesses Embraced Digital Marketing to Survive the Pandemic. This is for the Search Engine Journal, which is one of the highly regarded news outlets for this subject online. Seriously, we're in this time of really serious pain, and our clients are getting punished. Their customers are getting punished. There's no forward visibility. It just feels like a time to be bunkering your bunker, perhaps, but at the same time, a time of potentially of opportunity and a chance to rethink everything about what's going on in your business, maybe not only to survive, but to thrive thereafter.
Absolutely.
So I loved the theme that you had in this article. This is really why I wanted to get you on here today, about the idea of entrepreneurship, about being about solving problems. The stories that you had in this article really spoke to me in that vein. All over the map of the ways that their entrepreneurs are being creative in adjusting and working through this crisis really well. And we can all use some hope right now, so I figured it's a great place to start. So tell me, this is an interesting take on marketing during a pandemic. So what was your original inspiration for writing this?
So it's interesting. I started pulling together like pieces on an article that was about obviously marketing during the pandemic, but I was having real trouble with what I was seeing out there. There were a lot of things that just didn't really have any meat on them when you'd click through that were written about. There were these big generic kind of messages, and maybe some people found those inspirational or whatever it is, but it's something where I know I certainly wasn't, and they didn't necessarily like feel real, right? They didn't really feel like there was anything that was really happening within those articles. Then meanwhile, like just in my everyday life and what I was kind of going through, and living here in Los Angeles and kind of exist and shop and all kinds of things like that, I had noticed certain companies that I'm big fans of already that were clearly pivoting. They were using digital marketing or digital technology period to make sure that they didn't just kind of like go quietly into the night kind of stuff. And it was in contrast to a lot of businesses that I saw that weren't doing these things. There's plenty of them where instances here where you're going to see companies that are not going to come back, right? And I think when things are all said and done, and things get back to whatever the new normal looks like moving forward, I think there's going to be a lot of surveys on a lot of things where they look at the companies that survived all of this. And I would put hard money on the idea that a lot of them either embraced digital or were using digital already to get to this place. And the ones that didn't basically still hold on to these outdated ideas that they just didn't need to really get involved in any form of digital marketing. And they're going to suffer for it.
I would think so. Yeah, but hopefully it's not too late. But it's certainly not a good time to be behind the eight ball.
It was a lot. It was very inspiring too. I mean, I think I did really want to try and write something that was a lot more uplifting than I was seeing, because there was either the ones on preparing for the pandemic or the other side of it, which was just very heavy doom and gloom. And I was going, well, I'm tired of that. I think there's a lot of really inspiring stories out there. So hopefully a lot of companies that read this piece really, saw something where they go, oh, we could definitely do that. And these aren't giant companies. We've got a couple in there that are pretty good, good sized, large companies that we even work with. But there was plenty of they're just small mom and pop style shops or whatever it is that just kind of jump in this stuff. And I know they're brilliant for it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I'm a historian, so I was interested how you kind of kicked off your article. You're talking about Conrad Hilton. Can you just remind the listeners about this story and how it kind of inspired your thinking about some of these modern companies as well?
Sure, sure. So, for not everybody knows, but one of my first jobs out of college was with the Hilton Hotels Corporation at the actual like corporate offices in Beverly Hills. It was an amazing experience. It was one of the things where digital advertising, digital marketing was just kind of getting started, in the world kind of stuff, and I was the first of my kind within this organization, and which made it even more fun because they're while everybody was running around working for these kind of crazy startups that were getting like stupid money and stuff like that, and not really focusing on being great marketers stuff, I was kind of forced to be a great marketer. It was one of the things where like they wouldn't let you get away with this kind of like, hey, we can do whatever we want. Let's go nuts with this stuff. So it was a really fun experience. But one of the cool things that happens is like, in addition to getting your little book on first day, on like the employee manuals and stuff like that, they give you an actual copy of Hilton's like biography that he had worked on forever ago, whatever it is. And it kind of told the early stories. He had gotten his start in Texas and he originally kind of bought up this little hotel that was for the oilers, the oil field workers that were out there, and they'd sell the same room like 3 times a day, basically 3 different shifts to kind of line up the shifts, and it was just that's the way it works. So they were kind of like printing money once you kind of got it in shape and everything, and but the thing most people forget, it was actually like all of his origin story with the hotel business started during the last pandemic. It actually started during the 1918 pandemic, and obviously his story starts in 1919. But what most people don't realize is the 1918 pandemic ran all the way until the end of 1920. So it was a long run. Yeah, so it's one of the things where like hopefully we get past this a lot faster.
Please.
But it's one of the things where it was something where he had to have this amazing moment right when it also was happening. And hotels were different back then. They were just a different animal. They really were for, kind of like, hey, look, there's a cot in there. There's this is a bed and this is this. But what he did, because he knew this was already, like a thing, it was something people were already worried about, was this concept of cleanliness that he knew was going to be really important to people. So he made sure that every time that they change over a room, everybody got fresh sheets. Everybody got plenty of soap. All right, it was one of the things like they did a nice clean of the room and everything before you got into it, and that made all the difference in the world. He was really big on this concept of like maximizing the space that he had available. So there used to be this big dining hall that was built into it that nobody was using anymore because everybody just felt terrified of like eating because of the pandemic. Like everybody knew that you couldn't be in a tight room like that. So he actually went through and converted it into like 20 more rooms. And then it used to have this giant front desk that was on it. And you like cut it in half and put like a newspaper stand on it, a bunch of other stuff. So you could just, there was like, hey, there's spots in here where we're not making money. Let's figure out how to do that one. And just kind of maximized every place they could during, the economy wasn't good because we were just coming out of the war and the pandemic was coming in and everybody's, freaking out, everything like that. So he just really made sure that he made as much money as he can about every aspect. But he also kind of introduced this concept of like, people want a clean room, and that's all there is to it. And there's no reason just because these guys are working on an oil field doesn't mean that they don't deserve like a clean room. And that made all the difference in the world. Yeah. And that allowed him to really, like push forward, and he started buying other hotels. He partnered with other people, things like that. And because it was a very cash business, when he made all of the stock collapse and at the end of the 20s and stuff like that, he actually had a pretty good nest egg to kind of work with. And while a lot of like the big fancy hotels that he'd always kind of idolized were having trouble, because nobody was traveling and business travel was falling apart, whatever it is. He had the cash to where he could step in and actually like buy these hotels. So he bought the Drake in Chicago. He bought the Waldorf Astoria in New York. I mean, it just like the list
Keep your
went
Tinder
on.
dry.
Yeah, exactly. So he really, this whole kind of concept of mend your nets when the tide is out kind of thing. And, and he was able to kind of like grasp on these things. And then when the economy did come back, he was just set. He had all these things in place and everything, but he kept on with that very, constant, like everything's clean, everything's going to be, that way forward. So I've always kind of highlighted that and the idea of like, there's people that can, like kind of play the game right, no matter what the economy kind of looks like. And I always found it very inspiring.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. Because like you said, entrepreneurship is about solving problems and making the most of what you have right in front of you, not trying to solve yesterday's issue, but today's and tomorrow's. And this sort of quick pivot thing you're talking about, just like being able to look at various pieces of the business and say, well, let's just try this differently here right now. One of the things that kind of intrigued me, kind of bring it back to the present day, is this idea of, essential versus non-essential businesses. So some teams have had different kinds of economic forces playing on them because they have been able to stay open physically or not, or been able to get people in or not. And so one of the things you talked about in the article I was really fascinated by was ways in which non-essential businesses can make themselves more essential to their own customers. Not to violate any orders or anything, but just in the sense, what can you make yourself more top of mind, more absolutely essential to the people that really care about this sort of thing that you're working on? And you had some great examples, so I'd love to hear some of those right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one, believe it or not, actually was deemed essential, thankfully, but it was one of my local liquor stores, but it was something where their main way of driving a lot of business was through doing these very cool tasting events. And they used to do them 6 days a week. And they had just, big time follower. And there were people that come in all the time. They had, people were friends, they were family. I think there's even a quote in there from the guy that runs the wine program over there talking about we all know these people, we all hang, and this is just part of it. And it's a good way to do it. And they've actually got this great tasting area, whatever. And obviously during that tasting area had to get shut down because they couldn't have people in, and they changed the rules about how everything was going to work. And they immediately went, oh, we know this is going to be a big deal. We know this is a part of our business. How can we take advantage of this? And again, I love this. This is entrepreneurism at its finest, I think, is that instead of them going hey, what are you going to do? We're just a liquor store. There's nothing we do. They instead, well, let's actually do these virtual wine tastings. And they certainly weren't the only ones doing it. I've seen a couple others that are doing it now. But what you do is when you walked in the store, they actually had all the different wines laid out by day. So you could say, this is the Monday wine, this is the Tuesday wine, or whatever it is, and you could buy that one. When you checked out, they would give you the code to the Zoom that would be that evening's tasting event or whatever needed. And then they'd go through and everybody was on screen as usual. Their head of Dave, their wine guy, would actually step through and walk everybody through on the tasting notes, and everybody got to taste it together and chat and hang out and do whatever. And it was super fun. I've actually since then I've actually stepped into a couple of them on my own just to kind of see how it all worked. And they're so friendly and they're so happy, and you could tell it's something where from an emotional standpoint, it's helping people out. So that was
some beautiful engagement there. Just thinking about thinking like your customers and how to make it more. I mean, in addition to solving the problem of how to keep people engaged with these events, it's also just making something fun and new and different in a way is like a key. Two
other great ones that I saw, and these are two places that I actually do frequent quite a bit, is my local comic shop over here in North Hollywood. That's an easy one, something I go to every week to kind of get my comics and the same thing. And that one was truly one example of one where they just said, well, that's just shut down. You actually can't go in the store, and they were closed up entirely. So they immediately switched over to basically saying, hey, look, if you've got an existing what they call a pull list, which is basically if you're a comic fan, you can actually have them grab the titles that you want and they put them aside for you, and then you just come and pick them all up at once. And they switched that over and said, hey, and they communicated this all through email and through social media, whatever it is, saying hey, we're still back here. We're still kind of kicking around in the back of the store and doing this kind of stuff for you. Even though we can't open up, we can do this for you. And they would gladly ship that out to you. But they also went to a kind of it's kind of like a shopper kind of mentality where people could actually read in and they go hey, look, I'm stuck. I want something new to read. I generally read X, Y, and Z. what do you got? Is there something I want to do? And you'd end up having these fantastic conversations over email with these guys where they're going like, oh, I've heard this one's good. I heard, like Grant Morrison's doing a turn on Green Lantern right now, and I hear it's fantastic. And we should, and they go, yeah, it's fantastic. And we've got it in these formats. You can get these, collected versions of it. And it goes, that's fantastic, whatever. So it suddenly, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that was going through this. So that was a thing in of itself. And then, they kept their website going. They used social media and a bunch of other stuff to actually kind of make it happen. And then just to kind of keep pushing forward on this one is it's funny, like, again, they probably had to feel like Job here for a while, because like not only was the store had to be closed, but they stopped printing comics for a while. So they actually, like, all the printers went away, whatever. Right. So they had, like, we've had about 2 months here where there just weren't any new comics coming out, and that's their business, right? Like, that's the new stuff is mostly where it is. People love to go through the racks and find old stuff, but like the new stuff is really where it's at. And they went, oh no, this is a big deal. So they went through and came up with a brand new product. Like, they actually just spun it out, and it's called Curated. And it was this idea where they, with their existing inventory that they had on hand, they, gave people the option of like, hey, you can do a DC one, you can do a Marvel one, you can do an independent kind of comic label. And again, they pushed that out over email and social media and all these different types of options, and just got it out there. And I know I jumped on it because I'm always looking for something to read. And so you'd get this, new shipped box of coolness of new titles that you maybe have never touched before that you could kind of read through. And there's a bunch of stuff in there going like, how did I miss this? This is amazing stuff. And as you can see, when I interviewed the owner, he says, we're definitely holding on to this going forward. Like, this is something where, it just wasn't something that they were even thinking about. But meanwhile, they kept everything else rolling, and were able to pay employees and a bunch of this stuff. So another one that I thought was really cool and is one of my local record shops. So my actual local record shop is a place called Atomic Records. It's walking distance from my house, which is really dangerous. But they've just been closed, right? Like, there's nothing to it. They got a sign on the door saying that they're just, they're closed while this is all happening. And I'm terrified for them. I'm going like, oh, this would be a big loss if you lost this shop. Meanwhile, you've got this other great shop that's in Hollywood that's called the Record Parlor, and they're fairly new. And but they certainly weren't going to go quietly. They decided just like all hands on deck, and they're going to try every new thing they can. So they're doing stuff on Instagram. They're doing live discussions. They're doing kinds of cool events where, you could even have stuff delivered by Postmates, which I thought was particularly inspired. Imagine getting like records delivered to you by Postmates,
I like it.
But yeah, so, and you could still do, you could do curbside pickup and things like that. But it's another one where it was kind of like the personal shopper kind of mentality to it, which is like, what are you looking for, whatever. But they also, they had an eBay store. They're on the Postmates site itself. They had certain titles you could get up or whatever it is, and really kind of push this idea of like community and how can we help and how can we get this stuff out. And then it's funny, even after that article was done, obviously I'm an actual customer of theirs, and they just keep pushing forward on new things they can do. And one particularly inspired thing was that they acquired a new collection. I guess it was a guy that used to work at Tower Records in Hollywood from the late 70s and the early 80s. And his record collection made it over there. It's 3,000, records and just some prime stuff. It was all a fantastic collection. And usually what they would do is have a big event around that. They have a couple of like good sized rooms where they could put it out and people could flip through it and look through it however they wanted to. And obviously they couldn't do that in this environment. So what they actually did is they started having these kind of like virtual happy hours that were on Instagram Live every day from like 4 to 6 or whatever it is. And that started a couple weeks back. And what they would do is actually, they actually have like a DJ rig in the setup. And so their regular DJ guy was up there spinning some of the records that were from this collection. So you could actually hear like the good quality and they'd show it. And another guy would be down on the computer actually like talking to everybody that would be on the feed. And the cool thing is that if you heard something you really wanted, you could say in that moment, Like, I'll take it. Like, and they worked it through there where they would come back later on and, invoice you and then ship it out to you, or you could come by to pick it up or whatever you want. And none of these things that I mentioned on there, none of these things are giant investments, right? And that's what I love about them most. It's not something where they're going like, oh, it's going to cost us tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get all the rigs and all this kind of stuff to do this stuff. And it's like, no, these guys are doing it with their phones or their laptops, existing stuff, printing things out, using all these distant social media platforms that existed already that they can slap a logo up, whatever. And it just works, right? It's just one of the things none of that, kind of analysis paralysis that you sometimes get with the really big corporations where they go like, well, if we're going to do this, we got to do it right. And then it never goes anywhere, right?
Exactly.
These guys they're like, no, we're just going to go guerrilla on this thing and just kind of get the stuff done. And they're surviving for it.
I would hope so. It's just classic, amazing marketing and customer focus to think like, how do you feed the addiction of your most rabid customers? I mean, you are someone who loves new music, loves, platters, and wants to have access to good stuff and wants access to people just like that as kind of a sense of community and engagement. So it's just a really good example of how they're using this tough time to kind of create some little fun that brings you in closer. The store reopens, you're right back in with at a higher level engagement than you were before.
Yeah. So, and you can see in the article, there's so many of them that said like, we're definitely keeping this. Like, we're definitely, the virtual happy hour that they do at the record shop, they're totally going to keep going, even though they're open back up. But they're saying like, this is fantastic. Like, they know it's made a major difference to it. They know it's bringing people into the store, and they just love the reaction they got for it. It's fantastic. The comic shop's going to keep doing curated. The liquor store, said they definitely would do like some variation on it. So maybe that allows them to double their capacity for the wine tasting events back when they can have them live again. Maybe they start broadcasting while they're there. So people that can't necessarily make it in that night, they can do it, or don't necessarily feel safe to go in there, even after it's, deemed safe that people can go in, but it's something where not everybody's going to do that at the same time. And if it's, as the world is kind of easing back into these habits, they maybe, like, I feel safe, I'm still good at home, but they don't miss out, right? So
yeah. Well, tell me, you mentioned a couple of other examples in there. I think Headley and Bennett was one. There's another, really, Via Veda was in there.
Yeah,
tell me something about those.
Yeah, we obviously these are like two of our clients that we've been working for a while, and those are always very fun because we, as their agency, we immediately get asked like, okay, what do we do? Like, how can we actually do this stuff? And luckily with these two examples with Avita and with Headley and Bennett, there's some extraordinarily smart people running these shops over there. And so they had ideas for certain things. And so they'd work with us to go like, how do we implement? How can we take this further? What do we need to do on your end and stuff like that? So it was very much a partnership kind of thing. But early on, we were already having discussions with people of like, it's beyond what we actually do for them. It's things that are just out there, so we can at least pitch them certain ideas of like, use this technology, use this kind of stuff, figure out how to do it. And Avita is a fantastic example. Avita is obviously a beauty school, in addition to being a place where you could actually get your haircut and things like that. And as you can imagine, that got shut down pretty quick,
yes.
even in Florida. And it's something where they go, obviously we can't do this thing. And their business is driven by the idea of like, we usually help them drive new leads for their business on a regular basis. And then they kind of take it from there. And this next stage after we deliver that lead is that they do these on-site tours with the students. So they kind of walk them around and say, here's the classroom and here's some of the teachers and things like that. And they obviously couldn't do that. So they had this big gap in their funnel that just suddenly just dried up, and then they couldn't stuff, and things would usually back up. But again, they immediately pivoted, right? They looked at the technology that was in front of them. And it was so simple where they actually just started using FaceTime technology, that's just the regular FaceTime stuff that everybody's got on their phone, to do like a virtual walkthrough of this store. So they're just basically walking through this empty school while everything's kind of shut down, and saying like, these are the classroom settings, these are the some of the teachers, things like that. And believe it or not, they told us that more people were willing to do that than what they were getting before with the in-person ones, right? So and they went.
That kind of makes sense, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And so suddenly this thing unlocks something that they hadn't even thought of before, because you would just assume like, well, people obviously want to come in and talk, but there's plenty of people that maybe they don't. Maybe they're just their curiosity isn't a level where they can make down. Maybe they don't have time. Maybe they couldn't make the drive. Who knows what it is? So now they've got this new opportunity that they're definitely going to keep, where they can use this tech to kind of walk people around. And then obviously there's a bunch of stuff where they were on the verge of doing it before, but they when it comes to doing abuse schools and stuff like that, obviously it's very hands-on type of education where, you can't virtually cut somebody's hair. You can't virtually give somebody a facial or anything like that. Right. But there was, they knew that depending on how long this was going to last, they had some virtual training that they could do in the beginning of it to kind of get people started and walk through it. So they pivoted and introduced that in a real way. And while they're getting other licensing to do other pieces of this puzzle. So it's something where, they could have just, curled up in a ball and said, well, what are we going to do? There's nothing we can do here. But they said, no, we're definitely going to survive. And, I don't mind mentioning it, and I'm sure they wouldn't either. But like in the beginning, they originally started going like, do we need to pull the budget back? Do we need to worry about this kind of stuff? And they did for a little bit. And then after they figured out that they could do this and work, they immediately put it right back. So this is like, another example of a client that didn't cut their spend way back, didn't whatever it is. This like, no, we're keeping on. We're going to keep moving this thing forward. And that was probably some of the biggest advice that we gave to a lot of clients and even people that have just read it on our blog and things like that. Is just like, now is not the time to cut that budget. And we're so glad that so many of them listened. But it was very cool. Another good one was Headley and Bennett, and these guys, I'm so proud of them. I mean, we were already helping them kind of with their direct to consumer business, and obviously it was a much smaller part of their business before, because they were their main part of their business is obviously selling to large restaurants and hotels and things like that. It is their main source of it, and those were all closed for months. And so obviously that's going to put a big hitch in things. And so they basically worked with us to kind of expand their existing program with search and social and things like that, to kind of say what else can we do? How else can we get this word out? And even beyond, again, what we're managing for them, they started doing more things. So they're doing great interviews on Facebook Live with different chefs, just to show how like people. So they're actually like helping their community out along the way of like, how did you change? How did you pivot? How did you do whatever? Like, what's changed with all? Did you switch to takeout? How many employees did you have to lay off? Things like that. And it's something that people really got behind. And again, this is existing technology. This wasn't a big leap. This wasn't something where, you had to go in the studio and things like that. It was stuff that you could just do with the existing tools. And I think that's kind of amazing.
That is really cool. And, there's 100,000 different ways to make a business run. And it doesn't have to happen the same way every day. But man, it's staying in tune and connected and responsive in these kind of environments is really key to it also, I guess, to be able to read the tea leaves and see where things might be going.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, obviously I get to use that great quote from The Martian at the end of this article that you can see, but it was like, obviously we're not getting stuck on Mars here, but this is a pretty serious thing. But like he talks about the idea of like, everything's going to go bad. And the whole thing is you gotta fix one problem, and then you move on and you fix another problem, and then you fix another problem. And if you fix enough problems, you get to go home, right? And in this case, we're all kind of like looking at things the same way right now. The entrepreneurs just know that like, it's all about solving problems. How can we actually attack this thing? Use new tech, use existing tech, how can we do it on the cheap? How can we, what do we need to invest in? And, the people that have that kind of mindset, those are the ones that are going to survive this. And, it's very inspiring.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for taking us through this. So this new article is just out in the Search Engine Journal, but this advice is going to last the ages, I think. And looking forward to seeing what's coming next. I won't try to squeeze your new topic out of you, but looking forward to see what's coming next. Let's see. How do listeners get in touch with you? I want to find you online.
Sure. I mean, I'm on all the different social platforms. Twitter's a good way to find me. I go by Count Zero on there, so COUNTXERO. That's a good way to find me too. Or you can obviously find me through the Amplitude website.
Well, Jeff, again, thank you. And everybody, please stay in touch at amplitudeagency.com and stay tuned for more episodes of the Amplitude Digital E-commerce podcast soon. Thanks and take care, Jeff.
Thank you.